It was a unique opportunity to be involved in the greatest engineering project of its time.
It probably changed the Highlands forever.
People who come here, they don't really know what went on. They don't realise just how important it was, how significant it was.
We just got treated like a man.
We were young and impressive.
It was equivalent to a moonshot.
100 miles off the Scottish coast was a 35-square-mile area that was to become the Forties Field.
We've struck it rich, so rich that it could alter the economic outlook of Britain.
By 1980, on present forecasts, we will be producing enough oil from the North Sea to match our needs.
Oil is just like a pipeline full of dollar bills.
Europe's industry has a growing hunger for energy. They found it on Scotland's doorstep. Oil, 8,000 feet beneath the seabed. But the problem was the 400 feet above it. The answer? To build steel towers, then to construct working platforms from which to drill. That was the plan. This is the place.
This is Nigg Bay on the Cromarty Firth, the sort of place you'd escape to, away from the pressures and the bustle of urban living. The sort of place you bring the children and Gran for a paddle and a picnic.
Oh, don't you lose that light in your eye. Never do.
When we were children, we all went down to play at the beach on the sand dunes. It was fantastic. You used to run off a sand dune, land, and it was just amazing.
It was such a lovely beach to have picnics on, and so as the children spent a lot of time in the beach, and we used to go swimming. I used to go swimming as well.
And then suddenly there was these enormous dredgers that dug up our sand dunes, and that was shocking.
50 years ago, an extraordinary change came to the Eastern Highlands. The coasts of Europe were being scoured to find the perfect location for a fabrication yard to construct oil rigs for the Forties Field in the North Sea. This is the story of the place they found and the people who built them.
We had to find places to build the jackets, the platforms, and then we had to find places to build the production facilities that went on top.
We did a desk research operation first, then visited various yards or shipyards around Europe, as far east as Yugoslavia, as far north as Finland. We looked at Scotland, we looked at Ardine Point down in Ayrshire, Portavadi, which is Loch Carron, Kishorn, Dunnet Head, Ardasir, Nigg.
On the eastern side of the Scottish Highlands and in the shelter of the hills is the Cromarty Firth, a natural harbour with easy access to the North Sea and much of continental Europe.
And it became apparent that the Nigg facility was the best location, insomuch that it was close to the North Sea, close to deep water, sheltered, flat, very shallow, and we realised we could dredge, when we dug out the material from the graving dock, we could put that onto that bit of flat land and make more land, more space.
It was a perfect facility for the required work that had to be done on those platforms.
So how did the locals feel about this?
Most people, I would say, were in favour, but the local gentry and the big farmers, they just did not like the idea at all. And especially a lot of the incomers, the retired people who had moved into Easter Ross, they thought this was a very bad scheme.
There were people who were very much against it. There were even families who were divided over it. Some people didn't want it because it looked like an industrial nightmare in a part of the Highlands. Some of those people wanted to preserve an aspect.
At Nigg Bay in the Cromarty Firth, many Scots see a nightmare coming true. Here, an American multinational is building an oil platform for BP. The quiet has gone forever.
It's all very wedding, and it's terribly difficult to put it into words. But you just get that feeling inside of you that in 20 years, if I'm still alive then, I won't recognise this part of the Highlands. Because it's changing what was rather beautiful into something which I think will be dreadfully ugly.
I think there's an awful lot that's happened in a very short time. And I think this has created problems both in agriculture and in tourism. We are going to go through a difficult period in the next 5 years in agriculture.
You can imagine the farmers wouldn't have wanted it because they would have lost their workforce. But the flip side to the coin there is it probably forced the farms in this area to modernise.
I think the change was on anyway. The number of people that were working on farms had been falling for years and continued to fall afterwards. And you've got to remember, if I look from a selfish point of view, from the Black Isle, the like of Cromarty, there was an awesome amount of unemployment. And folk just doing casual jobs. They were probably on the dole and getting a few bob here, picking tatties and this, that, and the next thing. So, of course, it was a good thing for people.
It was a big, big change in the area, and there was excitement of the men getting jobs.
You had the farm and the forest, that's all we had. There was nothing else. And there was no work.
There was real jobs right here and real jobs in communities that basically were seeing a lot of the young people especially drift away, some to Inverness, some a lot further south to big city life, and not coming back.
They here in funny old Nigg are building the biggest oil structure in the world, in the biggest dry dock. They have the Japanese coming to photograph them and look at them and chat them up to see how they're doing.
It was fascinating. I realized that I was there, and I realized that we were probably going to do something that mankind had never done before. So, big ass hole in the ground, let's go.
Here at Nigg Bay on the Cromarty Firth in Scotland, they've dug the biggest man-made hole on Earth.
I mean, even the hole in the ground we dug is 6 times wider than the locks in the Panama Canal.
When you first saw it, you thought, wow, you know, this is something extraordinary. And it really was just a big hole in the ground, very wide, very long. At one end, there was a concrete dock gate, which kept the water out, floating dock gate. And as you look down from the edge of the dock into the centre, there you would see, you know, the flotation raft, big tanks through which you could drive a London double-decker bus, upon which the steel jacket would then be built.
The biggest problem was the facility was built in an area that didn't have a very big population.
I was a scrawny teenager that was brought up in this part of the world. I have the privilege of coming back for a year, you know, out of college to work here. So was involved in hiring the first people here. We started in Tain and then transitioned to here. And, you know, I remember this as a beach. So watching what was happening here, I didn't really understand it, but realized that this was a revolution. This was something different in the Highlands, and the area embraced it.
We couldn't hire people that had experience because there weren't any people that had experience. You just had to hire smart, hardworking people, big emphasis on hardworking.
I got a letter or a phone call, be down the pier Monday morning.
You know, in my village, when I was growing up in Manlochie, I also witnessed men who were in traditional country jobs overnight, switching, going to Nigg, and also the young lads from school going to the training school.
And the company is training its labour force from local men. But the voices that instruct are American.
I'm going to take and check a few of these problems. The first phase of this test that we have here.
I started in Nigg. I was 15 years old. We were taken down to the training school, and I remember the one vivid memory I have is being given a white, shiny hard hat, which we were all so proud of that we wanted to take it home. We were kids, we didn't really know what to expect. You know, we spent our childhood and most of our teenage years running about the rivers and the beach and that thing. We never experienced or seen anything like that.
I remember the first day we went up to see if there was any jobs available. I remember that. Myself and my friend, we weren't even dressed for working at Nigg. We had little mini skirts on. And we went up and asked, was there any jobs? And it was an American guy that interviewed us. And he said, yes, we could start as general workers.
My job when I first came up to this area was a radio and TV engineer. And the money wasn't really good, you know, and I had a young family to support. So one day, instead of turning right to go to Dingwall to my work, I decided I'd turn left and go to Nigg because I heard they were taking on workers there.
The curiosity of being a part of something that was new, that was coming up to the Scottish Highlands, where we'd heard all these rumours about Americans and people from all over the country. That seemed to play well into my area of interest. So it generated more excitement than fear, I think, for me.
It was very intimidating at the time, and we didn't know what we were going to be doing. We didn't know the type of jobs, the type of work. We knew we would be office-based. So we had 2 or 3 weeks in each department, and then the 6 months was up. And I was one of the ones that was chosen to stay.
Highland fabricators have had to turn to the unlikeliest sources in their search for would-be welders and grinders.
You're a grinder, are you? Yes. And how did you learn this?
You go to the training school for about 3 days.
I think women were better welders than the men because they were neater. Maybe their hand was steadier, I don't know, but yeah, the end result seemed to be a lot neater. And I think women are very particular when they do a job. I'm not saying men aren't, but maybe some men.
There was one guy, his weld was atrocious. The gaffer says, right, you got a letter for this. He says, but there's a lot worse than that. He says, well, you show me where it is. And he says, well, forget about the letter. Took him round the other side. He says, there. You're right. He says, all right. He says, who did that, I wonder? He says, me, I did it yesterday.
A total workforce of just a few hundred was anticipated. Soon, thousands were employed.
It took several months to figure out that they were way understaffed. The people that came to build the jacket in Scotland, they came from Greens Bio in Houston, and they'd been building jackets, but the jackets they'd been building weren't anything the magnitude of what we're building. So they totally underestimated how much welding there was on these jackets, and before it was all said and done, they needed 3,000 workers.
So they had to bring in workers from the industrial centres in England and Glasgow, for instance, people who were fabricators, welders, riggers, people who had been in shipbuilding. They were called, travelling men.
3 years ago, there were only fishermen in Cromarty. Today, there are more than 2,000 builders and welders, some of them foreign, and all of them suddenly put down in the middle of the countryside.
Well, I was looking for work, and I seen that there was going to be a lot of building projects in a place called Lamington, which is outside Tain. Also, there was going to be a lot of work in Peterborough. And I had a Lambretta scooter. I had not long married, and I tossed a coin, and the coin landed heads, and I jumped on the Lambretta the following day and ended up in Invergordon.
I came up from London on my motorbike in the middle of the winter. First thing I can remember was getting up to the Royal Hotel in Tain, and then drove down to Nigg on the Monday morning. It was bitterly cold. I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to be doing. Initially, it was going to be for a few weeks or a few months. Finished up being 5 years.
I came here as an accountant, so as such, I didn't really need to know too much about steel fabrication in those days. So when I went to work on the 2nd of January, 1973, I was faced with handwritten ledgers, paying the guys by cash. Things had to change.
We were living in Australia. We immigrated
In 1968, £10 tourists, that's what we were called. Tommy, my late husband, had been unemployed for quite a while. So we decided that we would give it a try. And then we came back home, we heard about Nigg. So in the winter of 1972, we returned to Scotland.
New strains were imposed on the community. Medical and other services had once more to be expanded. New roads, schools and health centres had to be built at breakneck speed. Ways had to be found of coping with the human difficulties caused by rapid change.
I don't think anybody realised how many people were going to come and live and work in the area. And we didn't have enough houses. So there was literally no room at the inn.
Though there was no lack of money, no houses were available. People lived in caravans.
Right at the outset of Nigg, there were people staying in pillboxes round and about, World War II pillboxes round and about the yard itself. And one lot of guys who'd come to Nigg to work would maybe find accommodation eventually, and they moved out of the pillbox, and another lot of guys moved into the pillbox. So it wasn't exactly hot and cold running water and all the mod cons.
I was washing dishes and Tommy passed the window, and then these two guys followed him and they came in and I said, hello, he introduced me, and Tommy said, can you have a supper for the Meg? And I said, yes, because I always remembered that my father used to do this. And my mother always said, deal small and serve all. So that was the Highland way. So I put a few more potatoes in the pan and took out another fish and give them a meal. And Tommy said, I hope you don't mind, Meg, they've nowhere to go tonight, so can they stay tonight? And I said, yeah, okay. And they ended up saying, I think it was 2 years.
600 of the travelling men were holed up in a couple of ageing Greek cruise ships that have clearly seen better days.
The crew, the able seamen and all that kind of thing, they were Egyptian, and the catering crew were Greek, so were treated to Greek food, which was lovely, you know.
When we went looking for a labor camp, we found these ships and decided that this was the best available.
The job is just from bed to where. There's no facilities for the men on the boat. The men can only drink, which, what else is there for us to do?
Always ends up in fighting.
There's fighting on the ship. If you come on here on a Saturday night, there's at least 10 fights a night.
It's just like Madison Square Gardens on a Saturday night.
Silly. I can remember once there was a battle in the galley when people got their food. And this guy, he thought there was a leave in his stew. And he was, well, I've got a leave in my stew. He didn't realise, because it was all good cookery and what have you. It was a bay leaf. He'd never seen it.
Housing was built eventually. I mean, respective councils round about started doing the building. And at one stage during Nigg's first lifetime, if you like, the population of somewhere like Alness nearby, where a lot of people had settled, went up something like 10 score in 10 years between censuses.
Folk were bussed from everywhere under the sun. I mean, there were buses going up as far as certainly Brora, and I think as far as Helmsdale, coming down and back every day, and then from Inverness and all over.
I used to hear my parents talk about the goings-on, you know, on the buses, men losing all their wage packets on the way home, gambling, things like that. And listening through the ears of a child, you know, you would pick up on all these carry-ons.
And then the Black Isle ones, of course, they got bussed to Cromarty and across on the ferry and back again.
I loved the ferry. The skipper of the ferry was a great friend with my grandfather, so myself and my brother and one of our cousins would run down from school. He would let us on the boat, hide us in the wheelhouse, take us across and not let anybody else on. It was great. And then years later when I left school, I ended up being the skipper of the ferry myself. So
the old captain that we had, Donald Patience he was an old fishing boat skipper, and he would take that thing across in any weather. And some of the times you were thinking, surely we're not going across there today like this. And
October, we always said October was, oh, October, you know. It was, yeah, it was really, really cold and miserable. And as I say, going over there to pick the guys up at 3:15 in the morning, we had to make sure we were there before the hooter went off, so that when the guys came, they weren't waiting, the guys just came. And when it was very, very, very rough, probably shouldn't have crossed, but when we did, 2 minutes from Cromarty to Nigg, 48 minutes to get back home against the weather. So that's what we were up against sometimes.
The drilling platforms themselves are the heart of the project. Giants who will sleep on their sides in great dry docks. Their beds the huge hollow rafts on which they will one day be floated away.
Magnitude and complexity of what we were attempting to undertake was by far the largest thing that ever happened. And we had the eyes of the world on us.
We've been going into a new technology, new offshore technology, and the complexities and technical difficulties have been quite enormous.
Well, let's take these technical difficulties. I mean, what are they? What is the problem of getting oil onshore from the North Sea?
Well, as you can see, out here where the platforms are, we're in about 400 feet of water, and we have to build structures to support about 15,000 tons of equipment, and to, of course, support it safely through the winter storms in the North Sea.
We, as Brown and Root, this was the deepest fixed platforms that had, for all the gas production that had been built up to date, and they were huge. And they got larger and larger as we got further into the design.
What really gobsmacked me was the tolerances that they were working to. So we were building stuff to millimeters. And in order to do that, you had to have a team that was cohesive, that knew what it was doing.
Nothing had been built with waves that big or winds that strong, and they actually didn't know how strong those winds were or how damaging and forceful the waves were. So the whole of the facilities had to be protective of human life, supplies for them, supplies for helicopters, refueling for the helicopters. It was just on a totally different scale. If you'd asked people, could it be done? The answer was no. And Brown's attitude was always that they had this can-do world, just went and did it.
I recall one time, it was working inside the big cans, the leg sections, the big cans we call them. Suddenly somebody started singing Uptown Girl by Billy Joel, you know. Before you knew it, the whole lot were singing. It was going up through, echoing up through this can, you know, and it was like a recording studio.
It was a lot of noise, cranes whirring, engines pulsating, generators turning, compressors turning, lots of noise, and there was clamour, and that is an energy in itself. It's a driving force. Noisy, but good.
The smoke, the noise is phenomenal. You know, at that time we used to wear earplugs, but we didn't have the proper ear protection in them days.
Yeah, there was a lot of fumes, especially when people were gouging.
Lots of people going in two directions because one shift was ending as another shift was beginning. You know, and you just, you know, saw people in conversation, saw people, you know, on their own. And yeah, you felt like you were part of something pretty big.
Going through puddles that were 4 or 5 inches deep, thick in mud. When it was dry, it was then dusty, so the environment there was entirely different from normal sites.
Chaos, absolute chaos. And buses, I remember maybe counting 15, maybe more buses.
So many people working in there. It was almost like something out of a Bond movie. It was huge.
Every day seemed to be like a new day, you know, and boredom never ever came into it. Granted, lots of it was repetitive in its own way. There was an enthusiasm about it that was infectious, you know. When you get that kind of atmosphere, the atmosphere is good, and you're having crack and you're laughing. And
the crack between Glaswegians and Geordies and Scousers, and
I suppose the quiet humour of the Highlanders. It was just wonderful. It was always a pleasure to go to work.
I think the balance between us conservative Scots and the gregarious Texan was a unique combination. It was like opening a bottle of champagne. You know, you opened it and it affected everyone.
So we had all these people with strange names like Ike and Hank and Leroy coming around with their American clothes, and I said they're real characters, some of them, they're really funny. I always used to laugh. You'd get the odd one who wanted to be Bonnie Prince Charlie, and you would get the odd chuchter who wanted to be John Wayne, you know, and we'd all have the cowboy boots and stuff.
You know, they held themselves tall and their shoulders were back, and, you know, some of them had a cockiness to them, but I think overall they fitted in well. And, you know, what was fun to watch was seeing a lot of the locals take on some of the American image. Cowboy boots and turned down moustaches became more popular.
And we'd never met Americans before, and so that came with its surprises, especially with some Americans would have spittoons that they would chew tobacco, and you know, this was normal for them, and we couldn't work this out at all.
They knew they weren't going to be here for good, sort of thing, but they were quite laid back, you know, which is very good. And they speak, yeah, and everything, no bother at all. They would say, oh, this, that, no bother. And they never ever give you a row. If you did something wrong, they'll come up and say, look, do it that way. But they never say, oh, you with a mess. No, no, no. They were so nice.
Out of this world. You couldn't get better till you tried. Could I say this? Yes. Million times in the British foreman and all that. If the New York seen you working a solid day, they looked after you. And you're treated like lords. Oh, God.
I don't know. The way I was raised to manage in Brown and Root is to surround myself with the best possible people that I could find. And then my job wasn't to supervise them. My job was to get them what they needed to do their job.
I think they had a more can-do attitude to their work, and but in many ways that suited guys who had been used to working on farms where they could make do and mend and get something going, even, you know, find this bit or that bit and get something to work. Health and safety wasn't really high on the agenda at the time. It was the speed to get the rig built and not oil out of the ground, certainly in the 1970s.
Well, to start with, things were built on the ground. Then what eventually happened, things had to get lifted up. And you were then up 30 feet, you were then up 50 feet, and as the rig went up, you were up 100 feet, you were up 200 feet. In the early days, there was no safety harnesses, so it was quite a dangerous job.
Up in the pile guides up there, we must have been 40, 50 metres off the ground, and it was cold January morning, these pile guides full of ice, and you were dancing about in them, trying to survey them. It was just frightening, the things that we got up to. But we didn't know any better. We're just young loons dancing about here on these icy pieces of steel, 40 metres up in the air.
Yeah, I remember when my hair went on fire, we were welding in this massive pipe, and it was also overhead you were welding. So the sparks were flying everywhere, and one went down my suede jacket. You had to wear these big, dirty suede jackets and gloves so you didn't get burnt. And some of the sparks went down my jacket, and the next thing I knew, I could smell this burning. And when I looked, my hair was on fire. So one side of my hair was a bit shorter than the other, but I obviously managed to put it out quite quick, but yeah.
Some of the crane drivers were apt to let the brake go when you were up in the basket and drop you 100 foot and think this was terribly funny. Whereas if you were in the basket, it certainly wasn't funny. But the safety record at Nigg, surprisingly, was excellent.
Just next door to the yard, there happened to be a wee Highland hotel.
Oh, the pub at Nigg, it was never referred to as the pub at Nigg, it was referred to as the piggery. You can imagine the reason why. Ah, the piggery.
When we realised that the yard at Nigg was going to happen, I happened to be in a solicitor's office in Tain one day, and informed me that the pub at the Nigg Ferry was on the market for sale. I left that office of the solicitor's office and drove straight down to Nigg. And at that moment, 2 landing craft were coming into Nigg with equipment on for the yard development, scrapers and dozers, etc. And Peter Patterson was outside looking, what's going on around here? In a Scottish accent. Oh, we're about to do some building work here. I understand your hotel's on the market. Are you just... Not now, it's not, he said.
Mine host, Peter Patterson, used to sell about 400 pints of beer a week. Now, it's 400 bottles of scotch and about 5,000 pints of beer as well.
A whiskey and a pint of lager, please. I heard at one time it was the Guinness Book of Records as the busiest pub in Britain. Aye, and that goes back to the Dray had to come down every day. They were using that much beer.
It could be quite a pleasant place, but after a few drinks it could get a bit boisterous. They actually decided they would build a bit at the back because when the boats came up and we had a camp up here, it wasn't big enough.
And the hardest drinking goes on in the new prefabricated extension with its wire-enforced windows. It's got 8 well-built barmen, 6 of the heftier ones specially recruited from Glasgow, and 24 beer pumps.
Somebody said if they won the pools, they were going to come back and buy the pub. And Peter told them that if he won the pools, come back and he would cash his cheque for him. So that might tell you how busy it was and how much money was going around at the time. Yeah, it's no different for getting into what you might class as a rough bar anywhere. There's good crack and there's good people in. Rough doesn't mean they're killing each other all the time. It's just, you wouldn't want to take your wife and kids there for a meal.
They paid a bonus when they had a float out at Nigg, and one of the lads had said, half serious and earnest as to when asked what he was going to do with his bonus. He said he would spend half of it on drink and squander the rest. Now that wasn't what everybody did, but it was what quite a few did. Money flowed pretty easily. Some of the free card brag schools and the pub were frightening with the amounts of money that were on the table.
Their presence has meant a changed lifestyle for the village postmistress. Her lot used to be postal orders for the pools, the odd pension, and a few stamps. Today, she runs a sub-office on the site and handles as much as £6,000 or £7,000 a week.
First of all, nobody in that part of Scotland had ever been paid with anything other than a pay packet. With paychecks, you got this stub, and suddenly the wives found out what all these guys were making. And so the number of refrigerators, freezers, ovens, washers, and dryers went up not by a factor of 2, by a factor of 10.
For families like the Shepherds, with 6 children to bring up, the arrival of the platform almost on their doorstep was a dream come true.
Before the oil platforms, my husband never earned any more than £12 a week. And I mean, now he never comes home with less than 50. I mean, it's a big difference when you've got 6 children.
And it must have made quite a difference with your shopping and so on as well.
Oh, yes. I mean, I can afford to buy things, luxury ice cream by the gallon and things. I mean, which we couldn't think of before, you know, meat in bulk. Even a holiday together would have been out of the question, which we could think about now.
How many years? Just looking at the children, you know, it's amazing.
And looking at yourself, how does that feel?
I know. I think, oh, that's a nice hairstyle. I should get that back. My husband earned £6 a week from Colonel Ross for working on the farm, but we had to pay £1 rent. You know, it was hard going. There was a lot of them big drinkers, but I think there were some that, you know, got a good life out of, you know, the big money. People maybe for the first time in their lives, could afford to go on holidays abroad. And, you know, they thoroughly enjoyed that. That was an experience, if it wasn't for Nigg, they probably wouldn't have had. We never ever went abroad, but I can always recall one of the teachers telling me that after they came back from school, she was asking them all, where did you go on your holidays? And she was going round the class and saying, and they were all going to Costello somewhere or another. So when she came to Jamie, we hadn't been anywhere because we had a caravan and we only went close to home. And she says, where did you go, Jamie? And he says, Costello Embo. Embo is a caravan site just past there. And we went there every year.
Mackay's in Tain was the radio and television shop. And I remember I really, really wanted a stereo. And my mum didn't want me to have a stereo in the house. And I really wanted one. So I went into Mackay's, much against her wishes, and I put down a deposit on a stereo that was about 3 feet wide. And then I waited about 4 weeks until I had more money, and then I went and paid for it, and I got my stereo. And there was a radio on it, a record player, and I loved it. It was fab.
3 of the older apprentices came out of the college, and they jump into bright red Lotus Elan, and they had long hair and beards. They're probably, I believe, 16, maybe they're about 19 or something. And I remember looking at them saying, I want a piece of that. And I think that was part and parcel of what could be achieved. Everything was new, everything was exciting. And in our own minds, probably everything achievable. It was the best job going in this part of the world. The wages were better than anywhere else. I mean, we had apprentices at Nigg who were earning more money than their parents had ever earned, which could cause problems as well.
In fact, the apprentices, they got paid quite a lot of money for being apprentices, but a lot of them got killed in fast cars, motorbikes. And there was a lot of deaths, actually, especially over that side, the Nigg side. Like.
The operation of installing the 30,000-ton production platform in the middle of the North Sea is so complex that it can only be attempted in the relatively calm weather of the summer months. So if the platform isn't completed by the spring, BP's project will have to be put back 12 months, as happened last year. Matt Linning, a lowland Scot with 20 years' experience as an oil engineer in Kuwait, now heads BP's North Sea project. As he flies to the construction site on the northeast coast of Scotland, he knows that he'll be pushed to meet even his present deadlines. But they're now a year behind schedule.
We did have some industrial troubles from time to time. And I remember on one occasion, Downing Street contacted the yard and said, it's about time you were sorting this dispute out because the economy is dependent on the Forties field coming as quickly as possible.
I have no doubts that this structure is going to float out in the late spring as we're forecasted, provided, as always, that there's nothing, no sort of act of God or the worst winter we've had since the year 1800 or something of that nature occurs.
You think that the production platform will be finished, ready to float out into the North Sea by June 1974?
At the moment, no chance.
Are you convinced that you are going to be able to float the production platform out into the North Sea in June 1974, which is your schedule at the moment?
Convinced.
If you lose days of production, you're losing huge value, you know. And so if you don't have production, you run the risk of the lights going out somewhere.
You could almost feel the team spirit amongst all the different contractors on site trying to get this job done. And of course, this was Ted Heath's 3-day week during the miners' strike. So Nigg was a site of national importance, and therefore it was open for work 24/7.
The British economy was in a bad way, a really bad way, after the
the war in the Middle East and the oil shock of 1974. So they needed the oil revenues as fast as they could possibly get it.
But we could go no faster. We had X amount of resource, X amount of labour. We couldn't put any more men around the world to make that world. We couldn't accelerate any further. You can only get X number of people around where you're making a joint, scaffolding, equipment to get there. Another man, you could never got him in there. Logistically, it's impossible. So we couldn't accelerate anymore.
Money was no problem initially. So one bit, they came to me once and said, if we bought some bigger cranes, could we accelerate the delivery? So I went away and looked at drawings and looked at different lifting sequences and plans. And I came back and said, if we bought these 2 cranes, which are the biggest in the world, we can take about 2 months off. And they said, good, go and buy them. I thought, well, don't you want to check? No, you've done the work. But I'm just a young engineer, surely. No, just go and buy them.
We had to take it out between May and maybe the beginning of September. After that, it was too late.
And so if you didn't have the jacket offshore in position, ready to install in that 4 to 6 week period, you got to wait for another year.
With a little luck, we can help it out. We can make this whole damn thing work out. With a little love, we can lay it down. Can't you feel a town exploding?
Platform's nearly finished.
We got everything completed. The platform was just ready to float out, and we did a final model test on on the total facility. And when they did the model test, it showed it in the big model tank floating out and uprighting. And when it uprighted, it just kept going on around, and it showed that it would come up and float upside down. And so we had to go back, get the engineers back in there, and we had to design these 2 huge spheres, or 30-foot diameter balls that we put on the side of the legs on one side. So when it uprighted, it wouldn't float up the other way.
This is the first high-fab user I produced on in 1974 in July to commemorate the completion of Highland 1, the first big platform built at the yard. But this was aimed to be a commemoration of the achievement of the workforce, the magnificent job they did in producing the largest oil production platform in the world at that time.
And nieces and nephews came to see the Queen and all that when they, and Prince Philip, when they came to christen the rig.
It's interesting to look back at the albums. Local people had been invited to sit and welcome them as they came out ashore.
I think the first we knew was when we were told that we were all going to be measured for kilts and outfits, because we were all going to be hostesses in some way or another.
This is the party and the lunch for the people to celebrate the Highland 1 being launched. There was food all day long, and it was just overwhelming, the amount of people that was there.
All the hard work has paid off. The time schedule's been met. It is launch day.
The actual float out itself, I always remember I went to work, I think on a Tuesday morning, and didn't get to bed until the Friday afternoon. So just 3 days, 3 nights, just solid all the way through, worrying about it.
I've checked everything up here. Over. Ready to launch. Not by putting the rafts onto water, but by putting water under the rafts.
The first thing was to flood the dock, and when the waters became level, the water was pumped out of the gate so it floated. The gate was pulled out, the tugs were hooked on, and then that was pulled out into the Cromarty Firth and then taken off and towed. There were just thousands of people who come to see it.
The whole of the seashore from Jemimaville was just lined with cars.
There was boats sitting about.
Crowds up on the hills, both suitors.
The world and his wife were there.
Well, you had to see it to believe it.
Herb, congratulations. What are your reactions now that you've got her safely out of the dock and ready to hand over to the customer?
Well, I'm completely happy like everyone else in Highland just now. It's a happy day.
It was like one big party all night. Everybody was there, and yeah, it was an amazing feeling.
There was ecstasy and relief and exhaustion and a second whiskey.
So basically, it was just a massive relief and a great sort of sense of just an elation. I just remember sitting on top of the scooter watching it going out, and it was just sort of, I felt like I was floating. It was just sort of magic watching it happen. Just, and I think also realising that was kind of a big part of my life that just sort of ended. And John Soul, who was one of the Americans, came up to me afterwards and he said, engineers hardly ever get the thanks for what's been done or the praise, but I just want you to know I like what you did. And he didn't say any more. I've heard, never forget that. It was the best praise I ever had.
Well, it was. Yeah, it was a big day for everybody, and I suppose we were proud of what we did, you know, and it was pioneering work, really, you know, pioneering work.
Yeah, a tremendous feeling of pride that we built that. That was built here. That was built by the people that you see standing here.
You know, it sounds a bit corny to say there's a little bit of me in that, but that's really what it felt like, even though I was just a trainee.
Very proud. Very, very, very proud.
It was really quite the sight. It's something that we had never seen in our lifetime, my father and my mother, and it was a new hope, really, to the area. It sort of felt good.
Highland 1 floated out at some 34,000 tonnes, which is more steel than the Forth rail bridge, and dwarfs landmark sites like the Eiffel Tower, St Paul's Cathedral. It was a massive structure. I don't think anything else had ever been built that size that moved.
Highland 1 is towed out into the North Sea. It'll take 3 days to get to the Forties field before they finally put her into the sea.
Out on Block 2110, the fleet of crane barges and support craft await the platform's arrival.
The sliding into the water, well, it didn't slide into the water. It was uprighted on the float of the barge it was built on. It was all connected. And it raised it up vertically. You flooded the bottom legs, and they went down, and it went down and settled to the bottom.
Roger. Okay, you ready? Roger. Okay, here we go. We have crash flap now. Control. This is all producer. We have crash flap now. Over. We have it down on the spears now as we are secure on the surface. Over. Okay, let's bring it down for it.
Then remotely, we had dynamite charges and we blew all the connectors loose from the barge.
The platform is safely on the seabed. Now its raft can be released.
There were thousands of things that could have gone wrong that would have led to disaster on the project. So there was a lot riding on not making a mistake.
And now to write, as it were, the last paragraph of that story of achievement, here is the Queen and the Royal Party in the Operations Centre.
A moment ago, as I pressed the button, we saw the oil from British Petroleum's Forties field begin to flow through the pipe at Grangemouth.
There indeed it is, the Forties oil, the oil which will be building up in...
Some people thought it should benefit the whole of the UK. Others said it was Scotland's oil. One thing's for sure, though. By 1979, there were considerable tax revenues from oil flowing into the UK Treasury.
When the project was conceived,
the price of oil was $4 a barrel. It was economic then. By the time it went on stream, in 1976, I think it was, it came on stream, the price of oil was at $17 a barrel. You can make your own stories out of that.
The workers got their wages, and it was great wages at the time, but it really was crumbs from the table, not even that, because they were making billions out there, these companies, and really, what does the area see from it today?
After the success of Highland 1, on and off for 28 years, the yard at Nigg did some amazing work. But eventually, a cold wind blew down the Firth.
I think some politicians worked on the pretense that it would go on forever and one thing would lead to another at these levels of employment. But there was whiles when there was no work at Nigg, and then, if you excuse the expression, it was shit or bust.
I think we could only see 2 years ahead at any one time, really. The next contract was all we were after. Unfortunately, the higher oil price kept us in business. And the fields became less viable as the years went on, so things changed, and eventually, well, the market dried up here.
I think everybody saw, the oil industry's never going to run out. That's going to go on forever. We're going to be rich. We're going to have great life. Until I think contracts were getting fought for between Nigg, Ardeshir, Arnish, all these places.
It must have been appalling for people that had been used to working there all their working lives, just suddenly there was nothing. And all the other industries that it supported.
Whatever you thought might be happening, the world changes round about you, and suddenly you discover it's not going on forever. I think that came as a shock to a lot of people that it wasn't going to.
With the downturn in the oil industry, the Cromarty Firth had become a parking lot for redundant rigs.
I've had a long association with Nigg as an artist. My first visit was as a young art student. 20 years later, in 2006-07, I entered that yard, and it was quite a sad sort of place to be in, where the seagulls had taken over all the high structures and buildings, and there was just really nothing going on. It was dead.
Many ghosts?
Many ghosts, yes, that's right. It was too fast, that was the problem. It came in like a wind rush, we weren't prepared for it, and in many ways we're not prepared for what's happening with renewables either.
Nigg was mothballed for 10 years, but some of the people involved in the extraordinary technology of the oil industry are assembling environmentally sustainable structures in the old yard, though the manufacturing of them currently takes place abroad.
Did you ever imagine you'd come back as the Hyhedian?
No. That's, I look down, my house is at Invergordon, and I look out here every morning and said, I started off life there, and, little did I know what I was getting into. So to look down in it and, to own it, but not so much to own it, to understand what it did for the Highlands. And I think we'll have a renewable industry where we will be building these structures for the future. They'll be bigger, they'll be better, they'll be more complex, and we'll be feeding electricity to Europe and to other parts of the world.
I'm saddened to see that they no longer build structures for the North Sea there. But hey, with renewables and offshore wind and perhaps a few other things going on, I'm hopeful that we might see life re-emerge at Nigg in some form of fabrication or manufacturing.
People have houses. People have got on in life better. People have got money. People have brought their kids up a lot better. Children have had a more comfortable upbringing. And I think that's the same in all towns in the area. I mean, you can go right up the north coast as far as Wick, and people will be, it's Nigg that made me.
Can you imagine what Cromarty would be like if Nigg had not been there? There would have been unemployment, the brew, casual work on farms, picking whelks on the seashore. That would have been it, you know, or emigration, or joining the army.
You know, people could come home. And, you know, that is an amazing feeling to come home. I loved Australia, but I loved Scotland more.
Every country I've been in, whether it be Australia, Nigeria, Russia, Indonesia, you know, South America, you never have to speak, you don't have to speak to many people before you will find yourselves having a connection back to the Highlands of Scotland and to these days at Nigg.
I travelled whole of Europe because of what I learned over there, like, you know, the welding and that. It was really nice.
I remember going to a tiny yard way down in the south of Malaysia, Pasar Gudang, myself and the other surveyor who was from Dingwall. The two of us turned up in this yard, walked into the office, and here's a voice, "How are you doing, boy?" And that was another boy from Inverness that had worked at Nigg, and there we were.
Well, I think, you know, most everybody that worked on this project, it was the project of their life.
People were shown another aspect of how life could be. There's a huge influx of some very exotic people, good and bad, you know. And I think that allowed the Highlanders to actually gauge what their lives were about. And when they started travelling and they started going away on the different jobs, they realised how strong and capable they actually were.
It was both life-changing and life-affirming, if you like, if that's not too pretentious, to work at somewhere like Nigg, particularly in the early days.
There were good years, happy years.
Because we got that big mother built and we got it floated out, and when we stood it up and nailed it down, it's still sitting there.